Welcome to the Innovators Playbook Podcast. I am your host, Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telient Systems. Each week, I'll be sitting down with entrepreneurs, product leaders, and technologists who are solving real world problems with bold ideas and smart execution. We will dig into what is working, what's not, and the lessons they have learned turning vision into reality. If you're leading digital transformation, scaling a startup, or just curious how innovation really happens behind the scenes, this is your playbook. Let's get started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Innovators Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telient Systems. Today, we are joined by Akshita Iyer, the dynamic founder and CEO of Ome Kitchen, a company that is reimagining the way we interact with our homes through smart and connected technology. After appearing on Shark Tank, as many of you may remember, Akshita has built Ome Kitchen into a brand that brings intelligence and simplicity into one of the most important spaces in our lives, the kitchen. She is passionate about solving real-world problems with design and technology. Her entrepreneurial journey reflects resilience, vision, and bold leadership. In this episode, we will explore her path, her insights on innovation, and what it takes to scale big ideas. Welcome to the Innovators Playbook Podcast, Akshita. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Seth. It's always a pleasure to talk anything entrepreneurship and tech and startups, and I'm excited for our discussion.
Wonderful. So I think a lot of viewers probably already know your story to some extent, but I would love to start off with you giving us a little background. I know you started with your education in neuroscience, but you've gotten into kind of a different area, which is kitchen technology and smart home technology. Can you walk the listeners through your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I took a bit of a detour to entrepreneurship, as many founders do. I went to Duke for neuroscience, thought I was going to go to med school and never really thought about doing anything else. And then when I graduated, decided to take a couple of gap years just because I wanted some work experience and maybe in hindsight didn't really feel like med school was the right path for me. I actually religiously watched Shark Tank. I loved the show, watched every episode, and the power of the show was really seeing your non-traditional entrepreneurs, right? No engineering backgrounds, no MBAs, no investing startup backgrounds, but just people who had problems in their lives that they wanted to solve. And so with that frame of mind in those couple of years, I really was thinking a lot about what problems in my life could I solve, and had so many ideas, most of them not so great. But one of them came after my mom, who was diagnosed with Parkinson's right when I graduated from college, so pretty young. She left the stove on by accident and started a kitchen fire. And at the time, I had never really talked to my parents about aging or the safety concerns that are in the home, whether you're aging or not. And this really brought to light one of the last remaining safety and security problems in the home, which is unattended cooking, the number one cause of house fires. We have so many smart devices and home security devices that are keeping our home safe, but this was one area that had not seen much innovation. And the timing oftentimes is everything. This was also a couple years after Nest had been acquired. So all of a sudden, there's so much money going into home security and IoT smart devices. And so my thought was, if Nest and Ring and August could retrofit something as simple as your thermostat or your door lock or your doorbell, why can't we also do the same thing in the kitchen, where innovation takes a while, appliances last decades? But what if we could just retrofit to your most used cooking appliance, solve for the number one cause of house fires, and then you can build on that into more and more automation in an ecosystem, just like other home security companies have done. And so that was the evolution. And I didn't know what I didn't know, and thought, how hard could it be to build a smart device? It's some electronics, some plastics, put in a box, you ship it. But so it was not that simple, but I'm glad I didn't know any of that, because I probably wouldn't have even started it or come close to where we are now. But grateful that I just went with it and just dove right in and learned on the go.
Wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think if you had known how complex and how difficult that journey would be, I'm sure you wouldn't have taken it. But that's what innovators do, right? So you find an idea and you jump into it, and then swim with the sharks, so to speak. I can go in a lot of different directions here. Let's start off with the Shark Tank experience in itself, right? So the fact that you're able to get on and do such a great job and you actually had an offer that you walked away from. So talk about that experience and what were some of the factors that you take away from there as learnings or as something that you'll probably be happy about or ponder on down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just for any listeners who don't know what our product is, what we ended up building is a smart knob. So, again, similar to your smart door lock or doorbell or thermostat, we built a knob that retrofits to any gas or electric, stovetop or range, and works exactly like a regular stove knob. So, you push, you turn, everything about how you cook stays the same. The only difference is that we have a bunch of proprietary technology, sensors, a motor, electronics that allow the knob to detect when the burner is on, what setting it's at, how long it's been on for, which burner is on, and then it can automatically adjust the temperature itself or turn it off proactively if you leave it on by accident. So with that context, and to my statement earlier that how hard could it be, this thing requires mechanical engineering, industrial engineering, software, front end, back end, firmware. Just literally everything you can possibly think of, plus more. And the whole story started with Shark Tank of just this was something I really resonated with in terms of seeing founders that you typically didn't see. And so I think that was really the power of the show. And about 6 months in, we were at CES for the first time. And 6 months in, meaning we barely had a functioning prototype. I don't even know if you could call it a prototype, but it was something that we could show. And we went two ways to get on the show. I don't know which way actually was, I guess, more powerful in terms of the executive producer seeing us. But at CES, they have an open call. And we did go and pitch for 2 minutes. There's maybe 1,000 people. And they just go through everyone. We did pitch there. And then at the same time, I was really trying to get myself out there just to talk about it, just to pitch. One of the things you learn as a first-time founder is how important storytelling is. And so I just wanted to tell the story. And we had applied to South by Southwest, but it was way too expensive to go. So we were selected to pitch on one of the stages, and then I didn't end up going, but they still put us in the brochure. And so I guess one of the executive producers saw the company and our background and reached out. And again, 6 months in, this was back in mid 2017 or early 2017. And basically she was like, hey, we think you guys have a really interesting story. Do you want to at least explore the process? Now, the Shark Tank process is very long. So the producers do extensive due diligence, not necessarily to make sure you have a good company, but more so to make sure you have a good story. Right. And that's one thing that you have to remember about Shark Tank is it's Hollywood and it's entertainment. They're really looking for is, are you going to make good TV? So we went through a 6-month process of sending videos, making sure that we were lively and engaging. And then every step of the process, they whittled down the companies. And then eventually we were invited to Shark Tank to film, but they invite more companies to film than actually get on the show.
Right.
You go not knowing whether you will actually make it in the tank until you are standing in the tank. And so up until that point, it's very stressful. There's a pre-pitch that we have to do so that the executive producers can see us live. And my goodness, that was extraordinarily stressful is an understatement.
Yeah.
We had at the time 2 parts of our product, a knob and then a gas and smoke sensor, because the idea was if we could just cover our bases with time unattended, and then also if we were to detect gas or smoke, then we could turn the burner off. Eventually, we ended up getting rid of that because there are already so many other smart smoke sensors and gas detectors that we could just integrate with that we didn't need it. But we had it for Shark Tank. And for the pre-pitch, it's like a 30-second pitch, as you see when you watch the show. And that gas and smoke sensor, they had put up on like this cardboard wall behind the stove. And maybe 15 seconds into pitching, it falls and it shatters. I didn't know what to do, but I just kept talking and just finished the pitch. And then afterwards, you're basically just waiting for the rest of the day to see what time slot you get for the next day. And the earlier you are in the day, the better, because if you're later in the day, you might not make it into the tank in case the pitches go long. So I was convinced that we would not get on. And they tell you, right, make sure that at every step of the process, you can get cut. And so don't you hedge your bets that you're going to make it into the tank. And so I was convinced we were not going to make it. And then while we're waiting, we're charging our batteries. And we only have maybe 3 because, mind you, these are very MVP.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how did you get them made? But we'll get to that. We'll just stick to the arc tanks.
Yes. So then we had these batteries and we were charging them when we have 3. And 2 of them started smoking when we plugged them into charge. And so we're like, do we charge the 3rd one? Or do we just leave it? And so we just left it because we're like, I don't want to take a chance. And then on top of it, the stove that we had and the prototype we had, there were issues with the retrofit because, mind you, we had not completely flushed out this concept of a universal adapter that could fit to every single different range. And so it didn't quite fit. Anyway, we get a call at 11:30 p.m. the night before saying that you're on at 11 a.m. or something. And then we get there, we're in the tank. The funny part is that when you walk out as an entrepreneur, there's no music. So it is pin drop silence when you walk out and all the sharks are staring at you. And then you have to stand in your spot for what feels like an hour, but it's, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds where the cameras are getting their angles. And then you do your 30-second pitch and then it's a discussion after that. And so you forget it very quickly that you're actually in the tank because it really is conversational. The sharks are not prepped ahead of time. And so we were in the tank for almost 90 minutes. Didn't realize it. I did not know, Seth, throughout this whole thing, whether the product was going to work, whether the art department somehow had pieced the sensor back together and glued it all together where it looked okay. The one time we needed this knob to rotate is the only time you see it rotate on the show. Like in our video, that's the only time it worked for that whole tour.
The stars were aligned for you.
It was so stressful, but I am so glad we did it because that all aside, we ended up getting an offer from Robert. We didn't take it.
So let me ask you a question. Had you already decided that before, I don't know if this is true or not, a lot of people go on the tank just to get the publicity part of it, but not really get the deal there. But so what were your thought process there?
We really wanted a deal. I think at the time we were completely bootstrapped. Again, 6 months in. I didn't really know what venture capital was. I didn't know what angel investors were. Like, I was really just trying to figure out how do we supplement our bootstrapped funds to the next level. So we really wanted a deal. Having said that, what at the time, I think we asked for $800,000 for 8%, knowing that we.
It was a big ask, right? For a pre.
But I think because I did negotiations, what you say is the anchor, right? And I think what we knew is typically sharks will give you an offer that's worse and then you meet somewhere in the middle. And so we knew that we'd probably have some wiggle room, but also knowing that this is a hardware product, there's software, there's all this technology behind it. We're going to need to raise more money. So I didn't want to give away too much right away. Knowing that we'd have to raise more later. And if you set the terms at whatever evaluation is on the tank, then you're going to have to stick to that when you go and raise more money. And I think we had an idea, but there are a couple of things that happened. One is when Robert offered $800,000 for 20%, probably valued the company more than it should have at the time with what we had. But we tried to negotiate somewhere in the middle to give advisory shares so it didn't affect the valuation. But the thing about the tank is you have 5 different investors with 5 different perspectives firing 20 questions at you. And so what ended up happening with Robert is we went back and forth maybe once or twice, and then we just got distracted with other sharks. And so that conversation just fizzled, and then he just didn't take the deal. And so I think hindsight would have prefer us taking a step back, maybe talk to each other, my co-founder and I, and just had a conversation about what are we willing to give versus trying to do it in real time when other sharks are also talking. It was just a lot happening at once. Having said all of that, I'm really glad we didn't take a deal, no matter how bad or good it was, because at the time, I really had zero idea what I was doing and what needed to be done. And so if we had taken that money, I think it would have just gone down the drain. And I don't think we would have made the progress that we really needed to, or I would not have been forced to go out and get the contacts and the advice and the experience that ultimately I did.
I'll counter you on that because one of the things that's mostly undervalued and underrated is good advice at the right time. Right. The counter to what you just said is the money itself, you would have probably burned through it. But having somebody like Robert and maybe his team by your side, you would have navigated some of the decision making along the way in a different light, in a different way, and could have maybe scaled this in a different way altogether. Maybe it's a licensing play, maybe something else. So what do you think of that?
I try to live without regret. So yes, could it have gone a different way? Absolutely. And could he have provided the support and the connections that we could have made use of? Yes. I still would say that because we didn't take that deal, I was really forced way out of my comfort zone. I went out to the Bay Area for a couple years to go and meet like venture capitalists and startup founders and former like hardware the founders of Nest, like all of these companies and founders who had built smart connected hardware from the ground up. And I feel like that experience, even of pitching in the Bay Area,
That's
I
true.
mean, really transformed what I knew about startups and what I knew about building a business, and then really manifested ultimately in us being able to raise capital. And so I think, yes, was there a path where if we had 800,000 in the bank and the guidance of Robert, we could have made the trajectory of the company would have been different? Yes. But I would also say that the experience I got because of the push I got from Shark Tank, right? After the show, even though we didn't take a deal, we heard from thousands of people, built a really big wait list. And then it gave me the courage to be like, oh, wait, maybe there's something here. Let me go and figure it out. And so it did take years, right? Years until we actually had our first prototype. We basically had to start from scratch. And anyways, I think however you look at Shark Tank, whether you get a deal or not, it is, I truly believe that the power of the show and going through that is, especially as a first time founder, is just seeing founders like you who are just solving a problem. And even if you're doing it in a non traditional way, it still
Yeah,
works.
you're absolutely right. It's probably
Right.
still done well, but the kind of learning would have been different. And here you've bootstrapped a lot of the learnings and you had the freedom to go in directions that you may not have been able to with them on your side. But yeah, excellent. Like you, I'm a fan of Shark Tank and it's amazing the kind of innovation that comes through there. And there's probably a lot of people, like you said, that don't make it all the way, right? So there's a lot of innovation that happens through that kind of channel. Let's talk a little bit about the product itself, the manufacture of it. Like you said yourself, it's amazing to me that you came up with a product that requires so many things, right? It requires engineering, mechanical, electrical, electronics, communication, and the sheer complexity of making something that retrofitting an existing appliance is, it's a lot. So talk a little bit about how did you source your suppliers and what were some of the challenges, especially during the pandemic years and probably now with tariffs and so on. So talk about your whole sourcing, supply chain, managing all that. And how did you learn that and how are you managing that?
Being a non technical founder with no experience in the kitchen or anything physical product related, it was tough. But so I guess maybe taking a step back, when we were designing the product, we went through a few contract development firms. Every time we'd make a little bit more progress, but then we'd have to start over because like you, we both alluded to, this is a very complex product with a specific use case that has never been built before. And so it's not like there's a tried and true way of building a smart knob, especially for the applications that we had. And what I learned through using contract development firms, I think they're great for phases. And if you know exactly what you need to create and what the specs are, and also if you have a strong technical lead on your team that can oversee that development. And so I eventually, by 2020, when we raised our first true round of funding, I was like, okay, all of our core engineering, which means firmware, mechanical, and some level of software engineering has to be in-house because I really need like experts who
Yeah.
really have built a product like this. And so fortunately, through all the time, and that's another reason why I'm glad I spent all the time in the Bay Area and just networking, is I did find really great, talented engineers who had built smart home products before. And so they honestly taught me a lot about how product development works, how engineering works, and then how that transitions into mass production. I don't even know what the final count on iterations of this thing is, but maybe 20.
Yeah.
That's way a lot because it's like all these small things that you're changing. And then eventually, when we got to Gen 1 production, we actually chose a manufacturer in the US because we were doing small batch production. And you hear horror stories all the time of companies going straight overseas without the right contacts, without the right management. And then when you're talking manufacturing and mass manufacturing, it's tooling, it's inventory, it's components, it's all this cash flow, which is where hardware gets hard to manage. And so we decided to go with a domestic manufacturer because we were doing a couple hundred devices at a time. In this time, fortunately, I also found an amazing CTO here in Atlanta who then took over a lot of that technical oversight. And he was at GE before and had managed products from prototype all the way to mass production. And I learned enough to know what everyone's talking about, but it is not my forte. I do not enjoy it. It's very stressful. And finding the right person to lead that. And then eventually realized we really needed to, one, go overseas because even pre-tariffs around COVID too, we had supply issues, semiconductors, our Wi-Fi chips were unavailable for maybe a year. And so we had enough components to build like 500 or 1,000 devices, but we didn't have a Wi-Fi chip. So we couldn't build anything. But part of that problem was that when we designed Gen 1, we didn't really think about the flexibility in the component selection where if one manufacturer or one vendor didn't have it, we could go somewhere else. So we were almost tied to a few vendors and suppliers for critical components, and we couldn't go elsewhere. And so part of that led to us building Gen 2, where we were much more intentional about the components that we selected, knowing that if someone doesn't have it or if we hit some kind of supply chain issue, that we have the flexibility to then go to different suppliers and that, there's other options. And supply chain and manufacturing, whether you're doing it domestically or overseas, is a learning process. And I think for every product, no matter how much experience you have in building hardware, I think you will always run into challenges in securing components in the manufacturing process, making sure your yields are high. And it's just a matter of just taking one problem at a time. And then, of course, as I mentioned, just making sure if you are a non-technical founder that you do have technical expertise in-house on your team who can oversee that.
That's a lot of learning. I'll have to give you so much kudos that you stuck through it and you built something like that. And it's a true heart of an innovator. I can talk to you all day about how you built your product and built the supply chain around it and how you managed all the crises that obviously you probably went through. But talking about innovation, I know your innovation was driven by a personal experience, right? So do you think that is a major factor for innovators to be, or entrepreneurs to need as a driver, or is that not a big factor? What are your thoughts on that?
I only know the personal route. I'm sure there's a lot of founders who maybe don't have a personal connection and maybe have a different take on this. But I think having that personal experience and really feeling the pain of that problem is more important, not necessarily to come up with an idea and to execute on it, but more so to stick with it.
Mm.
As I think many times, where I was like, do I even want to do this anymore? And as founders can attest to, it happens every week, every day, twice a day. And I think in those moments, what you always come back to is, why does this even matter? I think you can be passionate about a lot, and it doesn't necessarily have to have affected you personally, but I do feel that especially for products like physical products that take a long time and you have to be in it and somehow find that perseverance and commitment, I do believe that probably the best way to have that consistently is because it's a problem that has personally affected you.
Mhm.
So I think it's more so important in my eyes for the long run than it is to just come up with an idea and launch an app. Or it's how are you going to stick with it when things inevitably do get tough?
Yeah. I know as Mr. Wonderful, one of his favorite things is when he encounters a bad idea, he will say, just take it out to the back.
And shoot it. Yep.
which is not something you can do or want to do. And not only that, I don't know much about his founding background, but as a founder, sometimes ideas take a few iterations and it has to survive through some investors probably kicking it before it is successful, right? So I don't think they have all the answers, in my opinion, because things can happen, things that a founder sees that are probably sometimes not seen by investors.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at even Airbnb, right? Airbnb was thought of as like one of the worst ideas. Why would you rent out your home to people you don't know, right? But I think several investors and tech founders and CEOs have said this. Your idea should be divisive. Like you should not have everyone saying this is a great idea. Why doesn't it exist? You should have people questioning it because
Yeah.
otherwise,
And partly also because otherwise a lot of people would have done it, right?
exactly. I think if you look at any disruptor, any tech company or product like the Airbnbs or the Slacks of the world that initially did not have a lot, if even any belief that this was actually going to become multi-billion-dollar company. So I think you do want your idea to be a little divisive, but I do think at the same time, it's really up to you as a founder to constantly reevaluate, is this a problem that is worth solving and that people want solved? And I think only, that question or that statement that Kevin makes of shooting it in the back, I think you as the founder have to decide that. Take all the feedback you've gotten. Is this really an idea that's worth going for? Only you can shoot it if you want to. And so who are we to say that's a bad idea? If you can execute on it, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And probably if Steve Jobs had shown up on Shark Tank, you don't know what would have happened. So,
Look, I mean, if you look at Shark Tank, Rain,
yeah.
right? Rain,
Oh,
everyone went out on Rain, and look at it now. So again, that's what I always say about Shark Tank too, is, and even when it comes to raising venture capital, it's just because you were on the show, just because you raised tons of venture capital money does not mean that you have a good business, right? However you want to define it. It just means that one, either you're really good at storytelling, or two, that, even on Shark Tank, that you made for a good story, right? So there are a lot of companies that didn't make it on Shark Tank or that didn't make it into the tank that ended up going and that ended up building very valuable and successful companies. And so I think, what that good idea means and the metric you use to define that is important, but it's up to you as the founder of what it means.
yeah, switching gears again a little bit, AI has been the talk of technologists the last 2, 3 years. You are in a slightly different world, or maybe you are, maybe you're not. What is the role of AI as you see from your business vantage point? And what do you see so far and where do you see it taking?
Yeah, I think when it comes to hardware and manufacturing, and I guess more broadly, kitchen technology, I think AI, I don't think we're going to see the impact of AI for quite some time, at least from the consumer lens, in terms of how we use appliances. I think there is some kind of machine learning and algorithms that hopefully will play a bigger role in being able to recognize patterns, right, of behavior and be able to talk to each other. Nest has been doing this for quite some time, right, where it actually learns what your temperature preferences are and then it adjusts. So I think maybe more of that from a consumer lens as to how we interact with our appliances. But I think the kitchen and appliance industry, I don't think will be utilizing AI like other industries are as quickly, just because there are tariffs and there's so many other things on fire right now that I feel like integrating AI is not at the top of the list. Having said that, I do think that there's a few areas for companies to run, like HR technology and using agents when it comes to just internal workflows. And I do think that when it comes to manufacturing and robotics, the contract manufacturer that you use, I do think that there's going to be more automation so that we can bring down the cost of goods and increase capacity. Now, we're not manufacturing ourselves. I think just adjacent partners like that will be using more and more AI, and more so in this case, robotics, so that we can reduce the labor. A lot of the cost of building products is labor. And so I think that it'll affect that industry a lot more. But when it comes to kitchen and appliances in general, I don't see that taking shape anytime soon.
Yeah. What about the smart home and connected home vision? We've been hearing about it for a few years now. Do you feel like it's on the right track? Can I, for example, talk to my Alexa or Apple Power? It still seems to be like everything is compartmentalized or not quite connected like the way you would hope or
Yeah.
want.
Unfortunately, the smart home, yeah, it's still very fragmented. And I think there was an explosion of all of these smart devices and quote unquote platforms in the last 10, 15 years. And there's going to be some consolidation that happens. I don't know what is going to end up on top. I do think that ultimately there will be a few players that where everything hopefully kind of sits under that brand. Even look at Amazon acquired Ring and Blink and some other smart home companies where everything sits under the Amazon brand. Now, they're not integrated with each other, so I think that is taking time too. And then on top of it, I think that the cost to build product has gone up, and I think there are a lot of manufacturing and cost challenges that the industry is seeing. And unfortunately, I don't think we are where we thought we would be when it comes to the smart home and the interconnection of all these devices talking to each other so that us as consumers don't need to open 10 different apps to control different things in our homes. Hopefully, it will get there, and I think a lot of what we're looking at now is how do we bring Ome into a broader ecosystem where we're not another app, we're actually integrated with the
Mm.
other smart appliances that you have. And so it still has a long way to go. I do think we're making a lot of progress, and I think someone will have to come out on top. It's a question mark of who that is.
Yeah, they just broke ground near my house for a brand new set of homes. I didn't know where they found that space for it, but I still drive by that home site and it didn't look any different than they were building homes when I bought my house like 30 some years ago.
What has changed in that way? I think there are some industries that evolve faster than others. And depending when it comes to appliances and our homes, what we want out of our homes is pretty much the same as it was like 50 years ago, right? Yeah, we have smart lighting and smart security systems and things like that. But I think generally, as by nature, as human beings, we like the same things and we do the same things every day, right? We have routines. And I think ultimately what you want out of the smart home and to truly drive value for consumers every day is for the most critical things that you use every day to be smart in some capacity, but then also to be able to act on its own, right? For us to not have to always take that action, right? So whether it's, I don't know, I think we've been talking about laundry and washer dryers. Like one day, will we ever have a washer that can automatically just load laundry into the dryer? We have smart washer dryers
And folded
and
too.
fold it. Yes. So what are those tasks that we really need smartness for? Do I need a notification when my washer is done? Sure. Is it nice to know? Great. But is it actually making my life easier? I think that's the big question that we need to ask.
Yeah, there's a lot that is possible in these small robots and things like that. I think there's going to be at some point a little quantum jump where suddenly I think it's going to happen probably. But yeah, quick question on AgeTech. I know you're involved in AgeTech and AgeTech Atlanta and generally the AgeTech community. Do you see a lot of opportunities for innovation there?
So much. And I'm so glad that Jeff Gray, who you might know, started AgeTech Atlanta because as AgeTech has really become top of mind in the last few years, just because of how many older adults that we have, and all of us at some point are going to get older. And what we realize in Atlanta is the number of startups that were building solutions for older adults, whether it's specifically for consumers or even for senior living communities or caregivers and family members. And so I do think that there's so much opportunity and also a little bit fragmented, but I think the market is huge. And I think a lot of companies, especially larger corporations, know that the market is there, but they don't quite know how to access them. And I think that's where startups can come in, where we can just iterate and get in front of consumers faster. And so we at Ome even saw a huge pull towards senior living and aging in place technologies, whether it's the caregivers or family members buying solutions for their parents or the communities. And yeah, huge opportunity.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think, as you said, Jeff is doing great work and is growing that community. Excellent. Going back to entrepreneurship, what were some of the personal qualities that you think really helped you and what's needed for success?
Wow. I think maybe back to the passion, why are you doing this is however you find it, that grit and that perseverance of, I don't care how many people say no to me. The way ultimately I looked at it was that tell me no quickly so that I can just get to a yes faster, right? But I do think that takes time and it does take a little bit of determination of one, figuring it out yourself and giving yourself grace to say, it's okay that I don't know everything today. As investors often say, you want someone who's coachable, right? Can you at least listen to advice and listen to feedback? And then one of the most important skills as an entrepreneur is being able to listen to everything, but then only acting on a few things, right? Because if you act on everything people tell you, you will end up nowhere. And so it's really up to you to decide whether your idea is worth pursuing. It's how much of this feedback is relevant to me. You are the expert in whatever it is that you're building, and then acting on that. I think perseverance, that ability to be reflective and self-aware and coachable. I
Yes.
also really do believe, whether you're technical or not, being a good storyteller, because you're always pitching at the end of the day, right? Whether you're hiring an engineering team or pitching to investors or pitching to customers, you're always telling your story in some shape or form. And so being able to build some kind of emotional response to someone as you talk to them, I think is really important. And it's a skill. I don't think everyone has to have it when you start, but I think you have to be willing to learn. And then I think having an eye for talented, smart people around you and just always building your circle so that one thing, I think other founders have said this before, but I always tried to be in a room with people smarter than me, just because you always want to be learning, right? And that thirst for knowledge, I think was the saying when I was in elementary school, but that thirst for knowledge is that mindset that you always want to have as an entrepreneur, right? Because you're always going to hit something that you don't know how to get through yourself, but then eventually you'll know the people you can call on. So I think those are some things that come to mind.
Would you think you're born with it, or is that something that can be acquired?
I don't think you need to be born with the entrepreneurship gene, but I do think that there are personality types. And I think maybe part of it is nature versus nurture, right? I think I grew up with parents and my dad who went off on his own and started a small business when I was very young. And part of it is also seeing that risk taking, right? As you're growing up, if you don't see that, and then you may not have that kind of risk threshold that other people do. So I do think it's a combination. I think some personality types are better suited for entrepreneurship than others. Having said that, again, back to just constantly learning and evolving and being coachable, I think anyone can be an entrepreneur, especially if you do find that one problem that really you want to solve. I think you'd be surprised how much you're willing to go through when you do find that thing that really just strikes a chord and you're like, I'm going to move mountains to make this happen.
Yeah. What's next for Home Kitchen and what's next for Akshita?
Yeah. So, to a lot of what we've talked about and with the manufacturing issues and the challenges of building hardware at scale, we're really looking at the right home for Ome in terms of where can this technology sit in the broader landscape of the appliance industry. We built the whole idea initially when we were on Shark Tank and when I started was I just wanted to build a prototype. We filed IP, secured IP, and then I was going to go off to med school and then we'd maybe license it or something at the end of the day. Just kept going and here we are. But I do still believe that we have built a technology from 0 to 1 that didn't exist. But now to take it from 1 to 100, it's really important for this to be sitting under an appliance manufacturer or a company that has the supply chain, the manufacturing, and the industry infrastructure. And so even though we built this as an aftermarket retrofit, ultimately we know that all of this technology is going to be integrated, right? And the goal is really now that we find the right partner, strategic partner that can take this to the next level. And as for me, I'm really thinking about what does passion look like for me after Ome? And I think it's an interesting transition for founders when you're working on something that is so near and dear to your heart. And then all of a sudden you're like, if I do hand this off, then what do I do with my life? Who am I? And so for me, it's really thinking through and harnessing all of the skill set that I built as an entrepreneur. I feel like I'm a bit of what's the jack of all trades, master of none right now, but really complementing my entrepreneurial skill set and maybe helping other startups or maybe venture, working, corporate innovation. I think some combination of all of those would be really interesting for me as I transition into this next chapter, whatever that looks like.
Excellent. I think whatever you do, pretty sure that you're going to be great at it. And I think you've been a model entrepreneur innovator for a lot of people here, not only in Atlanta, but around the world. And so thank you for your generous time with us, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, Seth.
All right. Nice talking to you, Akshita.